Ele já roubou a cena, ontem ele brilhantou aqui a todos no palco. E hoje volta com outro tema palpitante, liberdade na era digital. Vamos chamar já aqui com a gente Jeffrey Tucker.
I was just telling Maria that some of the most beautiful music in the history of the world has been written about her, actually, yeah. And all of it is in the public domain, so no copyright problems, yeah. That's true. No, I mean, it's one of the reasons that, music, how it developed was that these chants were written without copyright, and then people could emulate them and write other kinds of music based on them as a complement, and then other composers would steal that melody and make it improved and improved and improved. And that's the way music developed, was because the music was available, and then you could recognize the songs. A terrible thing happened to music in the 20th century, that it all fell under copyright, and then every composer had to pretend to be original. You know, it led to a great deal of distortion and really catastrophe. Bach, Brahms, Josquin, Vittoria, Palestrina, even very late in the 19th century, composers composed without the use of copyright. And then serious music began to decline, in my view, in the 20th century, and I think copyright bears some responsibility for that. You know, the state causes so many distortions in our world. We could all spend the rest of our lives chronicling all the ways in which this is true. So in this lecture, I will be talking about the way the digital age has changed or caused, I think, libertarian theory and to some extent Austrian theory to evolve. But before I get to that, I do want to answer a few questions from yesterday because they continue to come up again and again about this subject of intellectual property. And I think it's really wonderful when people have questions. I mean, many of you were not convinced by what I said yesterday. And I think that's a very good thing, in a way. Because, you know, if you're immediately convinced by something, maybe it's a superficial point. Sometimes it takes a long time to come around to a point of view. As I said, it took me 6 years to come around to the view that intellectual property is not authentic property. It is a fake creation by the state that causes nothing but trouble in our world. And if that opinion scandalized you, and you spent the better part of yesterday thinking through things, and you spend the better part of the next few months thinking through it more and more and more, this is good, because this is the kind of work that Mises Brazil is trying to inspire. It's trying to inspire you to think really hard. Because out of thinking, out of thoughts, the world is created. Everything you see in physical reality, everything you see in Sao Paulo, everything you see everywhere in the world, is all the result of thinking. You know, everything begins here, and then everything you see, in a way, represents the past. You know, it's the results of the work that came before. So the things you're doing here, thinking hard, what are you really doing? You are creating a future, because the future will consist of nothing but what we think today. So that's why it really, really matters. So on the subject of intellectual property, many people are asking, well, how can you possibly make money without patents or copyrights? And the specific question concerns, well, if I come up with a new invention, then somebody can just take my invention and begin to manufacture the same thing. How can I possibly profit from this? And then therefore, how will anybody have the incentive to produce in the future? So this is not a new problem of our age. This problem goes way, way back in history, all the way to the beginning of invention. I'm sure the guy who came up with the wheel was very annoyed that there were other people who made wheels, you know. So wrecked his wheel business there. You know, he had like a week or something, you know, of profitability. Then, you know, he had to come up with something else. But I wanted to give a couple of specific examples, and forgive me those people who have already used this example. But I really like this example, but because it shows that you have to use ingenuity and innovation always in order to sustain profitability. As I said, the market is constantly beating back profits. It's like the whole competitive system is just this big machinery that's trying to deny profitability to even the most spectacular capitalist. You know, like every day, a great capitalist has to wake up and fear for the future, because if he continues to do the same thing, his profits will eventually fall to zero, so he has to do something new. But an example of Coke, okay? So in the United States, the Coke company in the early 20th century was very successful. It sold this syrup that you mixed with soda water and made into Coca-Cola. And it became, contrary to what Coke says, it is not a secret recipe. Anybody can make Coca-Cola. It's very easy. You reverse engineer it and you can make it. And it was very simple for people to pretend to be Coke in the early part of the 20th century. So it became a problem for the company, because there were all the people selling fake Coke, as they considered fake Coke. It's the same thing, but they wanted to market their own thing. So they tried various ways. First of all, they began to kind of attack their competitors all the time. You're a fake Coke. We're the real Coke. You should buy us. Well, that doesn't work so well, because consumers themselves need to have a good reason to want to buy the original as versus the copy. Eventually, the company came up with the idea of, well, what did Coke have over its competitors? One thing it did have is it had a lot of capital, had a lot of profitability it could deal with. So it began to build these manufacturing plants that made very special shaped bottles. And only their plants could make them, because they were very expensive. And the bottle, you know, the shape of a Coke bottle, it starts like this, and it goes thin, and it's got lines, and it gets wide, and it gets more narrow, and it goes up, and then like this. It's a very beautiful bottle, right? Well, only the Coca-Cola company could make this, because it was a very expensive thing to invest in a bottling company that could make this. So it began to bottle its Coke in this way as a way of signaling to consumers. And the slogan, "It's the real thing," comes about during this period as a way of tying it to the bottle, a way to create a unique good. And so they did this. Now, of course, in those days, there were trademarks. I'm not sure that they were ever really patented, but they were virtually unenforceable, you know. So you always have to come up with some market means of becoming unique, you know. There are many examples throughout history. Most of the time for manufacturers, it's not really worth it to spend all your time chasing down the people who are copying you. I mean, it ends up being more costly to do that than it is to innovate. I mean, you're better off spending your resources innovating. A good example of this is this guy, Eli Whitney, who claimed to have invented the cotton gin. You know this guy? So Americans all love this guy, Eli Whitney, because they think he invented this guy. He did not invent the cotton gin. I mean, he's like some sort of liar, okay? All he did was get the stupid patent, you know. I mean, that doesn't mean he invented it just because he had the patent. But he spent a lot of his time going all around the country trying to stop people from making copies of his machine. As a matter of fact, cotton had been ginned through machines for 1,000 years, so the guy was really just like what we would call today a patent troll. But anyway, so he spent a great deal of effort and time trying to stop his competition from making his machine. And guess what? He went bankrupt in the process of stopping the pirates from pirating his machine. It didn't get him anywhere from an economic point of view. So he eventually got out of the business of cotton ginning and went into the business of making replaceable parts for guns and things like this. And this time he knew better. He decided he would not take out a patent on his new machines. Instead, he would just make good stuff that people want to buy. That's an interesting idea. Forget the government, just make cool stuff that people like. That's a good way to make money. So he learned his lesson. But today, many people are confused. They think that the patent is the reason that that they're being profitable, or the copyright is the reason they're profitable, rather than their own talents. I have a friend of mine who invented an ice cream in the United States called Moose Tracks. So he patented, he made a trademark for this ice cream called Moose Tracks. And it's a wonderful ice cream, and everybody likes it. But of course, then impersonators came along and started to make other moose tracks. Well, he didn't like this, so he began to sue them, all the time. And I kept telling them, look, just let people copy you. It's just free advertising for you. What's the problem? No, he didn't like this. He didn't want to invent anything new. He just wanted to kind of continue to enforce his little patent that he had. So manufacturers began to get clever, like they would come up with a new ice cream flavor called Cow Tracks. And then he would sue them and say, oh, that's too much like Moose Tracks. And the judges would say, well, yeah, that's right. The Cow Tracks sounds a lot like Moose Tracks. So no, you can't call it Cow Tracks. And finally, a company out of Texas called the Bluebell Ice Cream Company came up with a brand called Happy Tracks. So he said, hey, wait a minute, Happy Tracks, that's obviously Moose Tracks. Well, he had a hard time convincing the judge. And the judge said, no. Mooses and happy have nothing. One is like a feeling of happiness. A moose is an animal. These have nothing in common with each other. Yeah, you can call your ice cream Happy Tracks. So, but from the consumer point of view, when you go to the store, you're buying Moose Tracks, even though it's called Happy Tracks. You just know this, So, so eventually he was defeated. I have an email correspondence with this guy, and I'm always poking fun at him. Why don't you just invent a new flavor, guy? What is this? Trying to defend your old flavor all the time. There are many ways to make money in absence of patents and copyrights. In fact, I suspect that entrepreneurs typically overestimate the value of their own intellectual property. For example, you all use the service called iTunes, right? Okay. So iTunes was an amazing innovation for the Apple company because it stopped, or it didn't stop, but it greatly reduced the amount of piracy going on in the music world. And how did it do this? By enforcing copyrights for music? Well, I mean, it pays royalties, yes. But the main reason it is successful is because it delivers a wonderful service. I mean, I could spend half the afternoon and get most of the music that I get on iTunes. I could pirate it somehow or another. But it's a heck of a lot easier just to go to iTunes and click a button and have it land in my library and have it beautifully sorted. And that's why it's so successful. People think they're paying for the music. They're not really paying for the music. You're not really buying a song. We say, I'll buy this song. We're not really buying the song. What we're doing is buying the service in tiny little increments. We're buying the service of downloading. That's it. So that's the good that's being sold. It's a brilliant solution. It doesn't really rely on intellectual property. What it relies on is providing a very nice service to people. I could talk all day about the solutions to this. Another one, which you should pay attention to carefully to this because it relates to my lecture yesterday. How did Google become amazing? How did it become such a giant? Its most valuable thing that Google offers is given away for free to everybody in the world. And that valuable thing is its search algorithm. That's its most valuable commodity. And it gives it away for free. And then, when it sells things, what does it sell? And the search algorithm, by the way, is a non-scarce good, right? It's the most valuable thing, but it is not scarce. It is not something that has to be allocated. It can be used 1,000,000 times, 1,000,000,000 times, 1,000,000,000,000 times every second, and its value is not reduced. It's an infinite good. So it gives away its infinite good, and then it sells the scarce good. So what is the scarce good that it's most successful at selling? It is the space on your screen, the geography of your screen on your laptop. It's the advertising that it sells. So that's the scarce good. because it exists in time and space. It can only run so many advertisements on a given screen. So that's the good it sells. Many, many digital companies have learned to deal with the issue of the infinite reproducibility of goods by giving that away and then selling the thing that is not infinitely reproducible. So give away the non-scarce good, sell the scarce good, and you've got a business model. And you don't have to rely on intellectual property at all. So that's just 3 examples. My friend Stefan Kinsella debates this topic all the time with people. How can you make money without intellectual property? And sometimes he gets exasperated. He says, look, you know, to tell you the truth, I don't know how anybody makes money doing anything at all in this world. It's extremely difficult. And he gives the example of paper clips. Paper clips, these little steel things that you use to put paper. He says, I can go to the office supply store and buy something like 500 paper clips for about $1. And these paper clips will last me, so far as I can tell, for the rest of my life. How does anybody make, these are very complicated things. I mean, it's steel, you know, you have to have the steel and bend the things. I mean, enormously complicated and expensive production involved in making a paperclip. And then eventually they sell for $1 for a 500 lifetime supply. How does anybody make money doing it? He doesn't know, I don't know. This is part of merchant craft. And the real challenge of being an entrepreneur is to come up with ways to do amazing things at a profit. New ways of doing amazing things at a profit. All of us in this room are enormously fortunate to be alive in these times because we're seeing the world recreated every day before our eyes in ways that surprise us constantly. If 10 years ago somebody had said that in the future you will be able to carry around a small device in your pocket that will permit you to call anyone in the world and have real-time video conversations with them, and that you will be able to do this without paying anything at all for the service, except for the basic data fee, you would not have believed it. It's amazing. Amazing things are happening every day. And we're such strange people, aren't we? We take it all for granted. Every time the new thing comes out, we're amazed for about 15 minutes. And then we want to know where's the next thing. I mean, I've got an iPhone 4, and I'm embarrassed. Where's my iPhone 4S? There are people around in this room, you know. I'm thinking, what am I missing out on? You know, it's the way we are. And I think that this time poses particular challenges to the Austrian school in particular, because we are uniquely suited to address them for a number of reasons. I don't think any mainstream economic school has anything resembling a robust theory of what it's like to live in a world of uncertainty, where you don't really know what tomorrow is going to look like. Only the Austrians have fully come to terms with the reality that economic behavior consists in large part of making judgments about an unknown future. This black hole that we call tomorrow, where nothing really is known about it, where everything could change. Only the Austrians have dealt with this subject seriously, and they've dealt with it through this notion of entrepreneurship. The entrepreneur is the person who looks around the world and assembles resources in new ways that are surprising and innovative, and makes a judgment about whether or not this thing, this idea, this service will serve humanity, and will do so in a cost-effective way, and takes the risk entirely upon himself and his firm to take a leap into this unknown future. The Austrians who came up with this theory long before the digital age. So I think we are in a position to interpret this age, and we must engage our times. So there's a job for all of you in this room as theorists, as thinkers, as entrepreneurs, to with the knowledge that you've been given by the Austrian literature to make a difference in the world. And you know, there's a long history of this. Elio's lecture about money, he described the early, what you might call proto-Austrian theorists of the Middle Ages, who began to develop a theory of money. Well, why did they begin to develop a theory of money? I mean, just thousands of years went by and nobody had thought about the topic, and then they decided to just on their own. No, it's because they lived in a world where financial institutions and monetary institutions were increasingly complex and important to the world. And it cried out for an explanation. So our predecessors got busy and provided one. And if you leap forward to the 20th century, you'll see that the Austrian theory of the business cycle became really sophisticated and really amazing. In what period of time? Exactly the period of time of the Great Depression, when the times cried out for an explanation, and the Austrians were there to provide one. So it is with socialism. Nobody had really come up with anything like a really amazing, rigorous, scientifically sound refutation of socialism until after the Bolshevik Revolution, and where Mises saw, well, listen, you can't have socialism because then that would destroy the pricing system for capital goods, and there would be nothing but irrationality. Nobody would know what to do with what. So Mises rose to the occasion. And so it was, I think, in the 1960s with Rothbard and his anarchist theory. And in any case, the Austrian tradition has always been very good at responding to the moment. And we, all of us in this room, are living in a very special moment in time. And it's what's called the digital age. And it's unlike anything that's ever happened before. It's like a hinge of history. Almost like everything before 1995 was the analog age, just back then. And everything since is this digital age. And it's ours. It's the world we live in. My children sometimes ask me, Daddy, were you born before the internet? And I have to admit that I was, and it's very embarrassing. And they want to know what it was like. And I describe to them the processes that we used to go through just to acquire information and to communicate with people. We could call people on the phone. There were long distance charges. You had to pay a lot of money to call somebody who was not in your nearby neighborhood, you know. To send something to somebody, you had to always rely on the government exclusively. To send anything like a text message, you had to type it up on a manual. Anyway, it was a very strange world. You don't want to know. Believe me, you don't want to know. It's too terrible. It's too terrible to talk about. So I think what I would like to do is describe to you what I think are particular insights that we can get or we can glean from our times in which we live that pertain to the Austrian school that will give you a kind of an agenda for the future of things to talk about. So, the first one concerns communication that are unimaginable, and everybody talks about this. What does this really matter? Well, the ability to talk, the ability to communicate is itself a productive enterprise. You know, as you look throughout history, we see that there were great periods of economic growth when people moved to the cities. They moved to the cities to get jobs, right? But once they were in the cities, something wonderful began to happen. They began to talk to each other and extract information from each other and communicate and learn from each other. That's what a city does. It allows us to know more than we do alone. We were speaking last night at dinner. How did it happen? How did it happen that the plight of mankind was mostly terrible from the beginning of recorded history all the way up to something like the early 19th century? And then suddenly, everything goes crazy. We all began to live longer. There was a dramatic fall in deaths at childbirth, income began to rise, the middle class began to be created, there was gigantic technological expansion, and we got railroads, and we got steel, and we got telephones, and we got electricity, and the world just began to change. And it's a remarkable thing to chart the whole course of human history and then see it suddenly shift. And we all began to, at dinner, offer theories about why this might be true. Why did it happen? Now, of course, we know that the invention of that the accumulation of capital is essential for economic growth. That trade is and exchange has to happen. That you have to have free trade. That you have to have entrepreneurship and freedom of innovation. All this is true, but these things had existed before. Why did it happen that in the early 19th century things changed? And there are many theories about this. Deirdre McCloskey believes that there was a gigantic cultural change that took place that allowed us to have a longer time frame for thinking about investment. Hans Hoppe has a view that people became more intelligent and began to be capable of greater degrees of planning. And I don't want to discount, there are many theories, and this is a very hot topic in literature today. I don't want to discount any of these things, but I do think that one thing that's often overlooked is that for the first time in the history of the world, in this very period of time, there developed a technology that permitted communication between individuals in geographically non-contiguous spaces. So that to get a message from somebody, or for somebody to get a message to me, I did not have to run, I did not have to ride on a horse, I did not have to sail on a boat, I did not have to put a message in a bottle and put it in the ocean and hope that it flowed away. Yeah? Or I didn't have to send a smoke signal, you know? For the first time I could do this. And you know how I could do this? It was through the wonderful thing called the telegraph. That was the great change. That's what allowed communication to take place all over the world. Communication matters because we need each other, because we have to learn from each other, because we have to extract information from each other so that I can observe your successful behaviors and emulate them as an entrepreneur, as a consumer, just in life. The more contact we have with people, the more knowledge we have, and the wiser our decisions in life can be. One thinker who's talked about this a lot is F.A. Hayek. He talks about the limits of the individual's knowledge. Sometimes I found it difficult to read Hayek because I can't always follow what he's saying. So I want to tell you something that happened. Joel Bowman's been bugging me all day to tell him the story, but I've been saving it for the lecture. So here's what happened. So we went to the Sky Bar last night, right? It's a very high bar that you can look out of the whole city of Sao Paulo. If you haven't been there, it's a tourist trap, but there we were. And it was very exciting to me. And so I'm standing there with Cristiano, and I forget now who else was there. Yeah, Leandro was there, you were there, right? And we began to philosophize, right? So, but here's the thing. Cristiano said, you see over that spot over there? I said, do you know this whole city? And this is a spot where you look this way and this way. Everywhere you look, all the way around you, you see nothing but buildings, beautiful life, a world made by human hands, a fabulous everything, right? It's just mind-boggling how beautiful it all is. Almost impossible to conceive of. And I said, Cristiano, do you know the city? He said, oh, no, I don't know the city. I don't know this part of this part of this part of this part of this. I don't know this. But I do know that part over there. That's where I live. See, right over there, right behind that building. That's where I live. And that's my area. That's where I live. That's where I work. That's where I go to the gym. And that's where my mother lives. And that's my neighborhood. And that's the part I know. All the rest of the stuff, I don't know anything about it. Interesting. I asked Bruno when we were coming in, I said, how long do you have to live in Sao Paulo to really get to know the city? He said, just to find your way around a little area, maybe 2 years. You know, so there's no hope for me. I'm here 4 days, right? But anyway, I thought of Hayek. And Hayek points out that the world consists of so much data, so many amazing things. It's far too big for us to imagine, to conceive of, to stuff into our brains. We are operating with such little information all the time. Only a little bit of what we experience, what we've seen. We're so limited. And yet we're called upon to do rational things, to behave as if we know. So Hayek always drew attention to the fact that we need certain mechanisms, we need systems of channels, we need tools that accumulate all this information and bring it to us in a special way that we can use. And you know what Hayek's answer was? You know what Hayek said is the thing that brings us all this information about the world that we can't in our own minds conceive of, that reduces it to little units that become useful in our lives? He says that is the price. The price is the thing that gathers information from all over the world and drops it right in front of us and allows us something to use so that we can behave rationally. I appreciated so much being on that balcony because it helps me understand what Hayek's point was. We need to know everything, but we can't really. So we look for tools. We have to find ways. The free market provides us a way. The free market price system has this fabulous capacity to take all of the world's information about availability of resources, about consumer preferences, about realities we can't see or even understand, and reduce it to a tiny number and drop it right in front of us and allows us to use it. That's what the free market does. The government doesn't do anything like this. I mean, the government is incapable of, I mean, what are they going to give us? A news broadcast, a newspaper? I mean, it's pointless, right? Only the free market can do something so wonderful. But there are other ways besides the price. In the digital age, we've discovered a wonderful thing called crowdsourcing. What this does is it allows us to give our projects out to a larger community to solve them. This is what's called the open source movement. In software, for example, no single software designer is brilliant enough anymore to make any software. Not even a team of software engineers are capable of doing what is necessary. All the low-hanging fruit is already in our hands. So the thing that we really need is way up there. We can't get there on our own, so we crowdsource things out. Let me give you an example of how crowdsourcing works. There's a chemical company called Eli Lilly in the United States, and it had many, many problems to solve with its chemicals, with issues that it needed its research scientists to solve, and new inventions it needed to create. So what this company had always done is what all companies have always done, which is to hire the best possible scientists from all over the world and put them all in a room and tell them to go to work to invent something. Okay, here's your job, guys. Go invent something amazing. We'll market it when you're done. And this is what this company had done for a very long time. It was a heavily capitalized company. It paid very high salaries to the best research scientists from MIT and from the best universities and stuck them in a room. But the new CEO in 1998 began to get very frustrated because he said, look at all this money we're spending on research and development, and I have no assurance that they're going to come up with anything useful at all. And nor do I have any sense of how long they're going to work on it, or whether they're working on anything that's actually going to be marketable. And he saw, after a period of studying the past and during his period as CEO, there was failure after failure after failure after failure. And the only way anybody could see to overcoming this failure was to spend more money, hire more big-shot scientists, and put them in a room and pay them even larger salaries and give them ever more time, and it wasn't working. So he had an idea. He created a website called Innocentive. It's like a combination of innocent and incentive. And by innocent, he meant that you're an outsider. He wanted to get outsiders to give inputs into his company so that these people, the insiders, were not always the ones that were being depended upon to invent new things. So he created this website that posed the problems that the research scientists were trying to solve. He said, okay, you guys are getting to work on a problem, give me your problem, and we'll post it on the website and see what happens. This was in 1999. And sure enough, at first it didn't work, but after about 6 months, these problems began to be taken on by unlikely people. Not just chemists, but physicists. It could be anybody, and they could live anywhere. It might be a failed master's in physics in India, and he would solve the problem. And what the company did is it paid people who solved his problems. It incentivized problem solving through an open source model. And sure enough, over a period of 4 or 5 years, they discovered that the open source system was fantastically outperforming the research and development department. I mean, they were hiring the best scientists. The best scientists on the inside couldn't be creative. It was because they had cast the problems onto the whole world and invited people to provide some solutions to them, and it worked. And it was so successful that the company, Innocentive, spun off and became its own enterprise, and now there are something like 450 corporations that are now using this website. And you can go to it right now, and it says, oh, hello, maybe you can solve some of our problems. And our typical award for solving our problem is between $10,000 and $100,000 each. And so the research and development department stopped growing anymore at Eli Lilly, and now they just outsource all their entrepreneurship. This is a brilliant solution. Now you understand that this kind of thing could only happen in the digital age. It would have been impossible to do anything like this 15 or 20 years ago. So we're seeing fantastic increases in productivity, all a result of communication. Communication has itself become an essential commodity, an essential part of the capital of any brilliant, productive enterprise. So another thing that I think we can learn from the digital age is that it's refined, I think, the Austrian view of goods. And I talked about this a little bit yesterday. But Austrians are in a very, very good position nowadays to come to a new understanding of what is an economic good and what is a free good. And I talked about this a little bit yesterday, but I think we're just at the beginning of coming to understand what this means, and just the extraordinary power associated with the infinite reproducibility of digital goods and the information that goes along with it. So this is another area that I think Austrians can look at. I mentioned earlier about the uncertainties of the future. Economists have tended to look at uncertainty as a terrible thing. Like, there's a terrible black hole in the future, and we should all be very worried about it. Unfortunately, I think most people are this way. We all tend to worry about the future. I think what the digital age has taught us is that the future is nothing to fear. It's an opportunity for all of us, because the future has yet to be written, and it is written by the ideas in our head, and it's written by the actions that we take today. So it's a tremendous opportunity for us as Austrians to embrace fearlessly, and I don't see any other school of thought doing this. Now, when it comes to politics, there are very interesting things too. The state, as we know it, very much lives in the analog age. If you look at the Keynesian apparatus, it doesn't even come to terms with the digital age at all. I mean, it's all based on the nation state. Wow, this is a global economy. It's all based on manipulating, big aggregates that are rooted in physical property. Well, guess what? Most of the production that goes on in the world, more and more, is digital production. It exists in cyberspace unto infinity. The Keynesian macroeconomics has absolutely no effect on an economy that's digitized. For one thing, and when you're working with infinite goods, there is no structure of production anymore, because prices don't pertain in the same way as they do in the physical world. So you're going to see a different effect of business cycles in a digital world than you will in a physical world. It'll have a different outcomes and different ways of behaving. The Keynesian system is entirely rooted in a kind of past. It's like an anachronism that depends heavily on big machines and cement and concrete and land and labor and all these big physical things. So it's become this terrible anachronism. And in fact, it's true for the whole of government policy today, which is so bound up with a world that is an exclusively analog and physical world that exists in the nation state. The state is ever more about the past, whereas the economic life of today's world is ever more about creating wonderful things in the future that the government can't even imagine how to regulate. We are so far outrunning the capacity of the government in technology. This wasn't true, say, 60 years ago. The government was widely seen to be the great innovator. Private markets, people thought the private markets couldn't do as much as government. That's why we had ridiculous things like moonshots and invention of these big bombs and creation of huge dams and projects. Somebody, I think it was Bruno, told me that in Brazil, there was a government some years ago that said that we are going to achieve 50 years in 5. Do you know about this? 50 years in 5. Yeah. So we're gonna have 50 years of progress in 5 years, thanks to the government. You know. Well, I don't know what kind of horrible things happened in Brazil during that period, but I'm sure it's just unthinkable. In the US, this used to be the same way. You know, like a century ago, the government would always try to give us progress. It would try to bring electricity to the poor workers and peasants in rural Alabama, you know. And it would always try to bring us things, and it's sold itself as this great means of progress. Well, no more. Everybody knows that the state can't do a damn thing as compared to the private markets. The private markets are giving us amazing innovations every day. What is the government doing for us every day? Virtually nothing. So you know what they're doing? You know what they do now in the United States? I don't know if this has come to here. Every day, they've decided the best use of their time is to make us as miserable as possible. And you know what? They're pretty good at that. They were never very good at this idea of progress, but they're really good at this idea of regress. So I think in the United States, we're going to see this campaign platform, I think maybe during this election. They're going to give us 50 years in 5, but it'll be 50 years of reversal of history, right? So we'll go back 50 years. So they ruin everything for us. They ruin our lights, they ruin our toilets, they ruin our lawnmowers, they ruin everything. The other day I ran out of gas, and so I had to call a gas station, and the gas station attendant comes and he brings me a gas can, and he's trying to pour the gas, and he said, I don't know what's wrong with this gas can. It doesn't work anymore. I don't know what is going on here. And I said, do you think that has anything to do with the government? And he said, yeah, probably does. Everything terrible is due to the government. It's like an Austrian, you know. Sorry, Walter, not an Austrian, a libertarian, right? Well, so I got back to the office and I couldn't wait to look it up, right? What has the government done to our gas cans? Sure enough, 3 years ago, a bureaucrat decided that gas cans should no longer have vents on them because this was a danger to the environment. I don't know why. Well, because we like vents on our gas cans, so that's why they took them away. But they were spreading misery. So they said, no more vents, you know, so now you have to pour the gas with no vent. So the darn thing, it doesn't work anymore. But this is true for so many of our consumer products. I mean, every day we're hectored. You're making too much trash. You're using too much water. Your food tastes too good. You know, this is... So this is what government, now ask yourself this, how long can this go on? I mean, how long are we as a people, how long is humanity going to put up with these rotten states that are dedicated to doing nothing but ruining our lives? I mean, how long can this system really last? It's crazy. I mean, it's true they're very good at doing it, but I don't believe it can sustain itself. I mean, over the period of the future, we have a choice. Are we going to embrace markets, entrepreneurship, private property, global exchange, and freedom that gives us wonderful things every day, that brings sanitized water to those who have not had it ever, that extends life in places where lives have been artificially cut short, that creates middle classes in countries that have never known such a thing, that in developed countries is bringing us miracles every day. It's amazing. You know, people complain about this. Well, I'm sick of all the new stuff. I'm just sick of it. You know, I just don't need another gadget in my life, you know. Well, let me tell you, this is a nice problem to have, right? It's a nice problem to have. Too much cool stuff to download, you know, every day. That's really great, yeah. But this is what we're looking at. I mean, markets are reinventing the world. You know, you can go to the developed world now. In most of the poorest countries in the world, you get better Wi-Fi than I get in the United States, thanks to all these wonderful innovations. Through social media, which I think people are putting down. People should not put down social media. It is not a waste of time. Social media is not a waste of time. It allows each of you as individuals to accumulate unto yourself network capital that you're going to be using the whole rest of your lives. Social media makes you as an individual more valuable than you would otherwise be. That is extraordinary. And that is something that has not been available to many people in the whole history of humanity. I mean, maybe if you were a movie star or something like that, you would have this kind of personal capital that was portable, that you could move from firm to firm to firm and carry throughout your whole lives. Now, this capacity to become ever more valuable as an individual and make this portable between institutions is available to every one of you in this room, courtesy of private enterprise. So, and I would say this is true of, I don't know what's popular in Brazil. In the United States, it's LinkedIn, it's Twitter, it's Facebook. These are not wastes of time. The more you can expand your network, the better off you'll be as a person. And these systems of association are very, very dangerous to the nation state, which relies very much so on keeping us out of contact with each other. This is the ideal world for the state, would be that you have no contact with anybody, you remain permanently an isolated individual, and that the state controls you and you only, and you are otherwise deaf and blind to everything else. But private enterprise today is trying to break down that system, put all of us in contact with everybody else, and create global networks of independent, free-thinking individuals that allow us to communicate constantly with each other every day, every second, forever. And it is breaking down the old order. And you know that many of the new technologies that are used, that are making life better for us, making us thrive more as human beings, are invented and influenced by the Austrian tradition. This is really true. So that, for example, the inventor of Wikipedia himself got the idea for Wikipedia by studying under and with Mark Thornton, a colleague of mine in Auburn, Alabama, who studied, who passed on to him some of the insights of Hayek about the decentralized way, that the decentralized nature of information, and how we need systems to call upon the talents of the crowd. Okay, so this is invented by Hayekian. It's true in PayPal. I've seen just in recent days a new website that permits you and me to adjudicate disputes across borders, small claims disputes, for a very low fee. It's called Judge Me. And it's an alternative to the government courts, invented by an anarcho-capitalist who was inspired by the ideas that we are studying at this conference. And it's true with PayPal. It's true with so many of the new technologies. These kinds of conferences and books like Human Action and readings by Rothbard are giving rise to new technologies that are enabling us to find ways around the evil machinery that's been created over the last 100 years, the despotic machine, the regimes that are trying to keep us from bettering our lives, the Austrians themselves are working to find technologies to not just fight the state, but to find a way around the state. It's brilliant. It's a brilliant innovation in strategizing for the enhancement of human liberty. And so this is another way that you can make a contribution as an Austrian. Perhaps it's not as an intellectual, although there is plenty of room for intellectuals. The Austrian system is far from complete, far from closed. It is open. It is open and crying out for your contributions. But there are other ways that you can contribute through entrepreneurship. For example, and don't let anybody tell you, as they used to say 150 years ago, that everything that can be invented has been invented, because we know that's not true. Now we have the possibility to remake the world every day and make it ever more beautiful. And never underestimate the extraordinary power of markets and the communication tools that we've been given to reinvent the world and to do amazing things. We are outrunning the bureaucracies. We are. As a global community of acting individuals, we will always outrun them. We always have, but it's ever more obvious now. If we continue with the same level of momentum, intellectually, technologically, I think we can look back 30 years from now and be amazed that anybody ever bought into this ridiculous system we call statism today. It will be a new world of human liberty, and all of us in this room will have made a contribution to making it happen. Thank you very much.
Temos perguntas da plateia. Tem uma aqui no meio que eu vi primeiro aqui.
English.
Em inglês, quiser.
Well, my question is, you said that we are more powerful in terms of intelligence, entrepreneurship, in this Facebook and those mediums to communicate to each other, and but the government can associate with some enterprise like Facebook or Google and monitor our communication. So this works as a tool for them also to know what's going on. So it helps us, but it also works against us, yeah?
Okay, yeah, so the question is, I mean, isn't it a two-edged sword? On one hand, we can use the technology, but so can the state. Yes, it's true. Is this sounding right?
Sorry?
Does this sound right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. But as long as we're staying one step ahead, I think it's fine. You know, it's very important for these digital companies to resist the state. Twitter, the other day, got an injunction that demanded them to turn over the records of some tweets that had happened a few weeks earlier, and they refused. And that's very good. And actually, its users were very pleased and congratulated the company. I'm very concerned about the capitulation of these companies, though, to the state. But think about it. As long as we have a competitive system, the companies that capitulate, you know what I mean by this? I mean, they give in. They'll turn over, sometimes they turn over information. Customers are very annoyed by this, and it provides an entrepreneurial opportunity for new things to come along that will not capitulate, new means of getting around the larger companies. So there's a very strong, I should say, disincentive for these companies to cooperate with the state. And it's true that the government can use technology, but the truth is it doesn't use it very well. I mean, maybe you all know people who work for the government. I mean, I do in Washington, and I hear amazing stories about how completely backwards the government is. You know, the government always likes to advertise itself as being this amazing technological, you know, thing that they have all amazing knowledge. They're spying all of us in this room, you know, whatever. The truth is that bureaucracies are never going to be as quick and as wonderful as as digital media. But let me say one other thing about this. One of the reasons that the digital age has been so powerful and so productive and so inspiring of entrepreneurship is precisely because it is so unregulated by the government. That's why it's been so wonderful, right? So we have to worry very much about anything that would regulate the digital universe. And this takes me back to my lecture yesterday and why I think it's extremely important that all of us get straight in our heads about intellectual property. Because the way the government is using, the means that the government is using to intrude into digital economies and to destroy actually the internet is, the main way is the enforcement of intellectual property. That's why I think it's extremely important for all of us in this room to get great clarity on this subject. It's ironic, isn't it, that the government would try to destroy the internet through the enforcement of what it calls property rights. Very interesting.
Hello, Mr. Jeffrey. Thank you very much for your speech.
Sure.
In 1 hour, you give me some inspiration for the next 10 years. But anyway, have you been to some sites of co-creation, like ledface.com? A site where you throw up a question and the crowd will help you to answer it.
Yeah.
And how you see this co-creation, cooperation against competitiveness in capitalism?
Well, what is the website?
Ledface.com. Ledface.
Leadface. Well, I'll look it up. I don't know. But you know, the question concerns crowdsourcing in general. You know, you might ask yourself the question, why is it that we have something like Silicon Valley? It's intriguing that the geography of the most innovative companies is not in the Northeast corridor, where Boston and New York and all these old-time companies with all the big research scientists and all the technological knowledge, they had been working on computers and technology for many decades, right? But nothing really came out of it. It wasn't until these young, reckless punks and outsiders and radicals moved to Silicon Valley, all the way on the other side of the country, that we began to see real innovation taking place. And why is that? Well, one thing is that over here in San Jose at Silicon Valley, they didn't care anything about intellectual property. They were glad to learn from each other, share information with each other. They openly stole things from it. It's very interesting. There's an interview with Steve Jobs. He said, you know, I am a professional pirate. Everything that I ever did that was amazing, I stole from somebody else. Okay? This is what he said. This was in the late 1990s, right? Then over the next 10 years, he began to develop a ever large market share and became, you know, a major player. And then he, of course, like everybody else, succumbs to the temptation to want a monopoly. Then he became suddenly a new convert to the cause of intellectual property after a lifetime of stealing ideas. You know, this is typical. But the point is, on the left coast at San Jose, there was a widespread sharing of information, emulating people, learning from each other, learning as an important market tool. On the East Coast corridor, you had all these old line companies, highly credentialed people. Hardly any of these people ever finished any school, right? They're all dropouts. These people all had high-level credentials. They worked for old line firms. They were all bound by contracts that wouldn't permit them to compete. You know, if they quit their job, they couldn't start at a competitive company. They had non-disclosure agreements if ever they left the company, that they could never share the information outside of that firm. So sure enough, the Northeast corridor completely stagnated, never came up with anything new. On the other hand, on the West Coast, where you had a free sharing of information, a great deal of recklessness, and outsiders trying implausible, crazy, stupid things, that's where you see the great productivity coming from. The market said, this is the good stuff, this stuff isn't going anywhere. So I think it's a good example of what you're referring to. Crowdsourcing of this sort of thing, doing crazy, stupid, reckless things by people who have no business at all doing them is the best way to come up with something wonderful. And by the way, I think this pertains also to intellectuals. As Austrians, we should not get too carried away with being worried about things like credentialism and who is an official Austrian and who is not, who is permitted to have an insight and who is not. As Austrians, we can extract information from anywhere. You never know where the newest insight is going to come from. I think as intellectuals, we have to take a tip from the markets here too and recognize that sometimes the best insights and the best theoretical advances come from the least expected places.
Jeffrey.
Yes?
Hello, my name is Eduardo. How about cryptocurrencies, the new digital, like Bitcoin?
Yeah, Bitcoin.
And
so
black markets.
And I don't know what Elio's, Elio could probably speak to this more. I don't really have an opinion about Bitcoin as such. My understanding is that it's not yet a money, right? It's more of a payment system, and that's fine. Maybe it can become a money. I'm not sure how exactly that would happen, but I'm not familiar enough with the technical details behind Bitcoin to comment on it. No matter how much I read on it, I still get confused. But I do know this, that if the governments had not prevented it, by now we would have already seen alternative currencies being created on the internet already. And there's pressure every day for this sort of thing. But there's a great deal of very interesting innovations, financial innovations, taking place every day on the World Wide Web, aside from the creation of monies. I hope that at some point we can get a real currency that will emerge from the internet. I mean, every time they try this in the US, the guy goes to jail. I mean, it's crazy. Like, he starts an idea, he says, oh, here's my new thing called e-gold, you know, and you can save gold, you can spend it like this, and it starts to be successful, and then sure enough, you know, he gets the guy comes in out of the roof and throws the big black bag over him, and he's zipped up and he's taken off, you know. So this is the way they're stopping the competitive currencies. But despite that, there's wonderful innovations taking place in the area of peer-to-peer lending, for example. Now, in the United States, I mean, we would be thrilled with interest rates of 5, 6, 7, 8%. I mean, this would be fantastic. The insane maniacs at our central bank are under the impression that interest rates should be 0, okay? This is their policy. Well, this is catastrophic for savers. If you try to save money in the United States, you will lose money. It's like negative value, you know? I mean, maybe there's other countries where this has been tried before, but it's very weird. But on the internet, there are some new innovations. It's called peer-to-peer lending that allow individuals to lend money to borrowers who are in need and to bypass institutions, banking institutions entirely. Like, for example, the Lending Club. And they're paying to lenders 7, 8, 9, 10%, and borrowers are paying less for loans than they would otherwise pay from, for example, credit card companies or something like this. And it offers, and with the default rates of 3%, you know, because there's a great incentive in the markets to reduce the number of defaults and increase the payouts for lending. Anyway, it's a beautiful thing to see. And it just came out. Nobody planned this. I mean, nobody at the Fed sat down and said, let's have peer-to-peer lending. No. I mean, this is all done spontaneously by markets themselves. So markets are finding even solutions to terrible problems, like the fact that you can't save money and make any money in the United States anymore. So we're just at the beginnings of the stages of financial innovation, just at the early stages. Who knows what kind of amazing things could happen in the future? If governments had ever released their hand away and permit competitive currencies, we could see a whole world monetary system reinvented right before our eyes on the internet. This is a very important priority. Monetary freedom maybe it's the most important thing that governments could ever permit. I don't know how we're going to get them to. I do know this. We do have the moral high ground in this debate. I mean, it is a violation of my human rights not to let me use whatever currency I want, anytime I want, to buy whatever I want. It's a violation of my rights. How dare they? And on what grounds? Are they protecting me from something? No. It's all about, of course, their revenue, right? I mean, this is a despicable kind of regulation. So I hope that we can make some progress in getting rid of these regulations and get over to that system that F.A. Hayek referred to in his 1970s monographs called Free Market Money and Denationalization of Money. What a great time in history for that to happen. Yeah.
One last very quick question. Onde temos? Lá.
What do you think about here?
Yeah.
what do you think about these so-called hacktivist groups like Anonymous and stuff? What do you think about this?
What is the name of the group?
Anonymous?
Anonymous.
I don't know the group. What does it mean, activist?
It's they are activists in the internet and try to
Oh,
put down
Anonymous.
sites, put down sites and
Oh, yeah.
attack.
Well, that's a dangerous question. Well, I'm generally in favor well, yeah, I don't think I'm going to say anything about that at all, actually. When I think about it, yeah. I will say this, that in the scheme of things, I do think that activism through the internet is going to be more effective for us than political action. You know, one of the things I wanted to do today, I don't know if I accomplished this, but as I think about it, more than anything else, I wanted to leave you thinking in a new way about what you can do with your lives. Too often in the past, this has been going on for a very long time, people would become convinced of the libertarian Austrian message. They would convert to maybe an anarchist position or an extreme classical liberal. They would understand the beauty of liberty, and then they wouldn't know anything else to do than to go out there and get involved in politics and say, government, you should reduce your size. You should be less involved in lives, right? Well, this is a little bit like, you know, and if that's all you have to do, it's like, here's a brick wall for you. Just bang your head up against it, you know, forever, just like this. Now that you've read 13 treatises, go bang your head up against that brick wall over there, and that's the whole of your life, right? All I'm suggesting to you is that there are other things that you can do besides continue to try to get the state to do what the state does not want to do, which is to give you more liberty. There are other ways to go about it. There's workarounds, there's entrepreneurship, there's creating new tools of empowerment that actually in real life do enhance human freedom. There's a way that we can progress beyond what the state can do. There's a way that we can build a new civilization, whether Leviathan decides on its own to go away. I don't think for sure that we know the exact course that history is going to take. It could be that one day we will wake up and this stupid government will just look ridiculous to everybody, and it will lose its power just simply because nobody cares anymore. This could happen. We don't know this. All I'm telling you is that there's many things that all of us in this room can do to enhance freedom besides just getting involved in politics alone. So, that's it.
Queria agradecer o Jeffrey Tucker.